Hello, hello, hello. Welcome. How's it going? How's everybody doing? Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and welcome to Rush to Judgment with Jessica. And I'm Jessica. How's it going? Hey. Hello. So, how are we doing? How's everybody doing? Are we ready for the new year? Is that what we're ready for? Are we ready for the 2023? Is that right? Okay, well, I don't know. I might be. Sure. Let's get into the 2023 and get into the new things and the new world and the new. Maybe 2023 will be better than all of the rest. That's what I'm hoping for. We can always hope, right? So, anywho, what we are doing, we are talking about some crazy stories. Crazy true stories. If you haven't noticed, that's what we're doing. We're crazy true stories. That's what we're talking about. So, these are just some short little stories that we're talking about, and we're just because your girl is slacking, and I haven't found any old trials that I want to go through. I haven't sat down and did that because I get real tired in the evening times, and I just don't want to at the moment. So I just haven't done it yet in the holidays, and I just haven't done it. So that's why. So I picked these, and I just haven't. There's also some other little interrogation videos and stuff, but these are quick and fun. Maybe not fun because I mean some are pretty gruesome and pretty fucking terrible, actually. So but uh, they're interesting. Um, and I like to do these things and just kind of, I mean, it gives you a good idea of like what's out there and just people in general. Like you just sit back and you're like, what the fuck is wrong with the world, bro? Like, what is this? Like, I don't even know. Like, I don't even know. So that's why I do this. Because I just look at them and I just kind of like that's my face. That's my like WTF face. And I don't know. So anyway, and if you're new here, welcome. And if you're, if this is your first time, that's fantastic. I'm glad, and I hope you'll come back. I'll be gentle. I no, I won't. I I am me. So if you like it, you like it. If you don't, you don't. That's fine. But I hope you like it. So, and if you do, obviously, like, comment, subscribe, hit that notification bell wherever it may be down yonder here, and let your friends know. Say this witty young lady over here. She does some fabulous commentary on these videos, and you should watch her. And she's great. So that's always a fantastic idea. Anywho, also a reminder with these videos, I am not an expert and I do not specialize in any particular area. and I do not claim to be an expert in any area. So none of these videos that I do are for any real educational value. They're just for me to give my commentary and my judgment and my biased opinion, so because we all have an opinion on things, and we all have, we all make comments. I don't know if you all sit and watch movies and make comments and talk through the movies. I do. So, if you don't do that, I'm sorry. Your life must be real boring. But that's what I do. That could be why I don't have many people to watch movies with, because they don't like that. Lots of people don't like running commentary during movies. But some do, and that's okay. And so, you just gotta find your crowd. Okay, so again, this is just me giving my 2 cents. You don't even have to pay for it. I give it to you for free. Okay? That's cool. All right. And I don't watch these in advance. So if you've seen these, or if you haven't seen these, cool. If you've seen these, you haven't seen them with me. So that's new. I bet you I'll say something that, you haven't heard before, maybe, perhaps. And sometimes, since I do watch this channel a lot for my true crime content, sometimes they do repeat stories in these little stories. So sometimes we have, but they do a good job of adding new things or elaborating on some things. So it's not the exact same story. So it's worth watching. So, okay, I stopped talking. I stopped just with me talking, and we'll get into this. And move me down yonder, and we shall hit play. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and leave a comment, and let me know what you think.
I don't know. What is it? Baseball card.
20-year-old Lene and her 16-year-old sister Trish were looking forward to the holiday season as they headed to their family's cabin in Utah, a place they fondly referred to as TD's Tranquility. At the time, the TD family viewed it as an escape from the world, but it would soon become a place of unimaginable horrors. Now, to say the cabin was isolated would be a total understatement. It was deep in the mountains, roughly 2.5 miles off the main road, and could only be accessed by snowmobiles in the winter. It was Christmas time in 1990, and according to Lene, her mother and grandmother had spared no detail when decorating their cabin for the holidays. My mom even had our Christmas stockings hung under the fireplace mantle, she remembered. On December 22nd, the TD family left the cabin and headed to Salt Lake City, where they planned to wrap up some last-minute shopping. Naturally, the thought of intruders breaking into the cabin while they were gone was far from their minds. But unbeknownst to anyone, 2 very dangerous men had done just that. As they made their way back, they were completely unaware that 2 ruthless killers were lying in wait and had even been videotaping themselves opening presents from under their tree.
That's what that is?
Lene got back to the cabin first that afternoon with her mother Kay and grandmother Beth. She raced inside to warm her hands under hot water, but right away spotted something strange out of the corner of her eye. It appeared to be a figure darting behind the refrigerator, and at first, she just thought it was one of the cousins they were expecting for a visit. However, Lene's blood ran cold when a frizzy-headed man came out from behind the refrigerator, holding a gun.
Oh, God.
Then, as her mother and grandmother came into view, another man
Mm.
wearing her father's sweatshirt and thick Coke bottle glasses emerged from a back bedroom with a gun. Assuming the motive was robbery, Kay briefly pleaded with the intruders to take whatever they wanted, but they responded by opening
God.
fire on the women. Lene
Oh,
watched in sheer
God.
terror as her mother fell to the floor, turning briefly only to see her grandmother get shot in the head.
Oh,
76-year-old
God.
Beth gasped for air one final time before the cabin went dead silent. As Lene begged the men to call paramedics, they ignored her and went about throwing her mother and grandmother's bodies off the balcony. Lene recalled one of them stopping to vomit in the bathroom and exclaiming, "This is sick. This is gross. This is disgusting." Lene's thoughts went instantly to her sister and father, Rolf, who would be returning any minute. She frantically tried to devise a plan to keep them safe, but just moments later, the sound of the snowmobiles could be heard, and one of the men grabbed her from behind, wrapping his arm around her neck and pressing the barrel of the gun to her back. Rolf and Trish pulled into the driveway and were immediately ambushed by the other man, who
Oh,
led them
my
into the
God.
cabin at gunpoint. Once inside, Rolf saw that his eldest daughter was being held hostage, with Lene recalling, "My dad could see tears in my eyes, and it was an unspoken communication, and he knew at that point that something awful had happened to Mom and Grams." The intruders demanded money from Rolf, and he obliged, tossing whatever was in his pockets onto the floor. Then the man restraining Lene told the other to shoot him, but for reasons unknown, he refused. So the man with Lene took matters into his own hands. His weapon misfired twice, but the third shot struck Rolf directly in the face, and he
Oh,
fell to the
God.
floor. As the two young women watched on, the men began dousing the entire cabin in gasoline, which there was plenty of around the cabin for the snowmobiles. They then set the place on fire and demanded the girls load up the snowmobiles and get ready to leave. Doing as instructed, Lene and Trish each got onto a snowmobile with one of the attackers behind them, and they set off, leaving Rolf for dead in the fiery blaze. It seems likely that the man who refused to shoot Rolf could be the man who vomited earlier. Given the physical response to the first killings, as well as the refusal to shoot the father, it appears that one of the men may have been having at least some second thoughts. If this is true, there could be several reasons why he didn't just leave or try to stop the other man. He may have been afraid of repercussions from his partner, who appeared to be calling at least some of the shots. He may have felt that there wasn't a safe way for him to get out of the situation. By choosing to not shoot Rolf, perhaps he felt like he was not as responsible for what happened. Even if one of the assailants didn't want to kill anyone but just agreed to a burglary, under the law, both would still be charged with the murder.
Still both.
For a defendant to be guilty of a crime, it's not necessary that the defendant do all of the acts of the crime. For example, if two people join in a common purpose to commit a crime, each of them is guilty of the crime
Capital
and
murder.
is also guilty of any other crime committed by the other in the pursuit to commit the crime. This is called acting in concert. So even if the two men agree to just burglarize the home, but in doing so, one assailant shot someone, that other assailant can also be charged with that shooting, as it's a natural or likely consequence of committing the burglary. From the back of the snowmobiles, the sisters were secretly trying to find an escape, with Trish later saying, "I had all kinds of different plans of how to wreck the snowmobile, how to throw him off into a tree, how to get rid of him, but all I could think of is I couldn't leave my sister. There was no one to help us. There was nowhere to go." Then they passed by the girl's Uncle Randy, who at first simply assumed they were out with new boyfriends for a joyride. However, as he waved to his nieces, they ignored him and passed right by out of fear that the intruders might kill him too. When they finally reached the main road, the two men forced Trish and Lene into the back seat of their family car before speeding away. Trish glimpsed that one of them was also carrying a knife, and when he saw her looking, he said, "Don't worry, I'm just as good with a knife as I am a gun." Suspicions rising, Randy saw the car pulling out with the girls in the back and tried desperately to make them stop by yelling and waving his arms, but the girls continued to ignore him. At this point, he knew something was terribly wrong, but before he could stop to think, he heard another snowmobile in the distance. The first thing he noticed was that the rider wasn't wearing any protective equipment or warm clothing, but as they got closer, he realized blood was covering the person's
was
swollen
Rolf.
face. Then it suddenly occurred to Randy, "Oh my God, it's my brother." Against all odds, Rolf had survived the horrific encounter by pretending to be dead when he hit the floor. After being shot and set on fire, He managed to rip off his burning clothes and hop on a snowmobile to rescue his daughters. He could barely muster the strength to tell Randy, "I've been shot, my wife has been killed, and my daughters have been kidnapped." Randy helped his badly bleeding brother into the back of his car, and he took off after the girls, trying all the while to reach service so he could call for help. Finally, as they caught up with the stolen car, Randy's mobile phone came into service and he called 911, yelling at the operator, "Guys, I need a helicopter now." Randy gave detailed instructions on where the car was headed, and the operator assured him that they had police in the area who would be there soon. Meanwhile, Trish and Lene sat terrified in the back of the car as it sped more than 90 miles per hour down the road. They felt a quick wave of relief when they saw a police vehicle turn around and start following them.
Bad
But
idea
all
in
hope
those
vanished
roads.
when their captors sent the car plummeting down an embankment.
Mhm.
Officers swarmed the crash scene with guns drawn, and miraculously, Trish and Lene emerged from the wreckage unharmed, with their hands in the air, yelling that they were hostages. The two men surrendered and were instructed to get down on their knees with their hands behind their heads. Trish and Lene believed their entire family was dead back at the cabin, so they were shocked to learn that their father was being airlifted from Randy's car to the nearest hospital in critical condition. The two suspects were identified as Vaughn Lester Taylor and Edward Stephen Deli, parolees who had recently run away from a halfway house they'd been staying at while looking for employment. The two men were previously in prison for arson and aggravated burglary, respectively, but were now each facing first-degree murder charges. In addition, they were also charged with attempted first-degree murder, aggravated kidnapping, aggravated assault, theft, arson, and failure to heed a police signal to stop. The term aggravated is added to a crime when something is done to make the circumstances of the crime more serious. Here, the kidnapping and assault charge are aggravated because they committed these acts while brandishing a weapon. Authorities rushed to the crime scene, where the top floor of the cabin was still on fire. They quickly located the deceased bodies of Kay and Ruth and noted countless bloodstains and bullet holes tarnishing the once tranquil vacation spot. Investigators also uncovered several vital pieces of evidence, including a tape from inside the family's video camera. The shocking footage revealed that robbery was not their only motive, and that the attackers had clearly intended to murder the family. They ate the family's food and even opened their Christmas presents on camera while waiting to strike. It later came out that they had called a friend back at the halfway house and bragged about their plans to kill a family and steal their car. Vaughn and Edward reportedly chose the location because one of them was familiar with the area, and when they discovered that people were home at the TD family cabin, they knew they'd found a target. With evidence mounting against him, Vaughn pleaded guilty to the murder charges in 1991. He opted for a penalty phase hearing before a jury rather than a judge and was sentenced to death. Edward's trial took place a few weeks later, with his attorney arguing that Vaughn had done all of the shooting. Trish and Lene gave heartfelt testimonies, confirming that Vaughn had been the one holding Lene around the neck and that he was the one who shot Rolfe. Edward was ultimately found guilty of second-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison. While the family wasn't happy about Edward's sentence, they took immense satisfaction in seeing the look on his face when he realized Rolfe was, in fact, alive. Trish later stated, "I remember watching the look on Deli's face as he came in seeing my father, and it was very apparent to me that he didn't know my father had survived, and the look on his face was just priceless, like he'd been defeated. My dad survived. We won." In 2001, Edward reached out to Lene in a letter, expressing remorse for his actions and claiming to no longer be the same evil person. After 9 years of contemplation, she courageously accepted his apology as part of her road to recovery. On the other hand, Vaughn Taylor has attempted to appeal his conviction multiple times and argues that Edward did all of the shooting on that fateful day.
I don't give a fuck.
The remorseless killer even claimed he had brain damage in an effort to be spared the death penalty. The vast majority of defendants that are given a life sentence or the death penalty try to appeal their case. If Vaughn Taylor could actually prove that he had such severe brain damage and therefore wasn't competent to stand trial, his appeal would have been granted. That, however, was not the case here. The apology letter that Edward sent to Lene may have appeared to be genuine, since she eventually decided to accept it. From a psychological perspective, it would make sense if the man who was physically sick during the attacks, the man who refused to shoot Rolfe, and the man who expressed remorse to the family were all the same person. We don't know if that is the case here. However, it does appear that Von Taylor failed to take responsibility for his actions. It appears that he lied when he claimed that Edward did all of the shooting, as the victims identified Vaughn as the one who shot Rolfe. Pathological lying, lack of guilt, and failure to take responsibility are all traits of a psychopath. In 2020, the U.S. District Court Judge Tina Campbell made a shocking decision to overturn Vaughn's sentence, stating he'd not been given a fair trial. Oh, but don't worry. It was reversed in 2021 by a federal appeals court, and Vaughn's now back on death row. Rolfe passed away from cancer in 2008, surrounded by his and his daughters will forever remember him as the hero that saved their lives. As for Lynette, they refuse to let this tragedy define them and have since rebuilt the cabin in the mountains where they enjoy spending time with their families without fear. Because, as their father once said, lightning never strikes twice in the same location. And just like that, we're on to our next case. When Todd DePriest said goodbye to his wife Nancy as she headed off to work, he had no way of knowing that it would be the last time he'd ever see her alive. However, what initially seemed like a cut-and-dry case ultimately transformed into a high-profile
I'm glad
fight
they
for
rebuilt the
justice,
cabin.
spanning more than a decade. Born and raised in Texas, Nancy was a vibrant 20-year-old with a devoted husband and a young daughter they named Sylvia. On October 24, 1988, Nancy arrived for her shift at an Austin Pizza Hut at around 7 in the morning to prepare pizza dough before the restaurant opened. The young wife and mother was a reliable employee who would often work alone in the morning, and this day was no different. Still, her manager called just to make sure everything was going all right, but no one answered the work phone. After several more failed attempts at reaching Nancy by phone, her manager decided to check things out at the restaurant around 9:30. Upon entering the building, he quickly made a horrifying discovery. Nancy was clinging to life in a pool of blood, and she'd been tied up with her own bra. She was rushed to the hospital, but tragically succumbed to her injuries later that day. An autopsy concluded that her cause of death was from a single gunshot wound to the back of her head. Furthermore, the medical examiner noted that it appeared she had been assaulted prior to her murder. Back at the crime scene, investigators found no signs of forced entry and believed the motive to be robbery, as there was money missing from the restaurant's safe. While there wasn't much evidence to work with, at least not back then,
somebody
a 22 caliber shell casing was discovered next to Nancy's body. Then, 2 weeks after the murder, 22-year-old Chris Ochoa and 19-year-old Richard Danzinger went to the Austin Pizza Hut for a bite to eat. The two were roommates who worked at another nearby Pizza Hut restaurant, but employees found their behavior that day suspicious. Beyond inquiring about her death to the security guard, they also appeared to make a toast to Nancy's memory, which prompted multiple mentions to the police. Investigators interviewed the two men as well as Richard's girlfriend Donna, who claimed they'd been together that evening. But just 2 days later, Chris confessed to his involvement in Nancy's murder and even implicated Richard in the crime as the shooter. The roommates were subsequently arrested and placed in jail while they awaited trial. Chris accepted a plea deal in which he would testify against Richard to have the death penalty taken off the table. It's common practice to give deals to one defendant in a multi-defendant case in exchange for their testimony when the prosecution
Whoever
can
is
use
willing
it to
to
prove their
rat
case.
usually gets
Richard's trial began
a
in
better
January
deal.
1990 with him pleading not guilty. Chris testified against his friend, but as a shock to the prosecution, he changed his story on the stand and said he shot Nancy, not Richard. Still, the judge found Chris's testimony very convincing based on the DNA evidence found at the crime scene and their odd behavior following the murder. So, despite the lack of physical evidence directly connecting him to the crime, Richard was found guilty after just 7.5 minutes of deliberation, and he was sentenced to life in prison. Now, it was Chris's turn to face the music. Instead of the death penalty, he pleaded guilty and was also sentenced to life imprisonment. 3 years into his prison sentence, Richard was brutally attacked by a fellow inmate, and while he survived, he was left with permanent brain damage. He was eventually transferred to a psychiatric prison in 1997. However, a year earlier in 1996, something happened that would turn this entire case upside down. A man named Joseph Marino who was serving time in another Texas prison for robbery and assault, sent a chilling letter to the police saying he had been the one to kill Nancy DePriest. He cited newfound religious beliefs as his reason for confessing, as he stated in the letter, "I am 100% responsible for the death, the robbery, assault, and murder of Miss DePriest." Joseph may have wanted the chance to clear his conscience, as it's possible the guilt had been eating away at him over the years. However, it's also within the realm of possibility that he wanted to take credit for the crime and show everyone that he had literally gotten away with murder. Joseph was already serving 3 life sentences for aggravated robberies when he confessed to killing Nancy, so he may have felt that the attention and notoriety he would receive would be worth any additional jail time he might get. Additionally, Joseph told them that they could find evidence at his home, linking him to the crime. While the Austin police located a money bag, Nancy's keys, and the gun he claimed as the murder weapon in his residence, they still believed Chris and Richard were involved. So they worked tirelessly for 2 years to find any sort of connection between the 3 men. It's easy for police to get tunnel vision and confirmation bias in cases once they set their minds on a particular suspect as being guilty. Meanwhile, Joseph kept trying to get his story heard and even wrote a letter to then Texas Governor George W. Bush, saying, "You are legally and morally obligated to contact Danziger and Ochoa's attorneys." The letter went unanswered. Finally, in 1998, authorities notified the district attorney's office of the confession letter. They also visited Chris in prison to ask him about the possibility of a third accomplice, but he stuck to his original story, insisting that he and Richard had acted alone. Sensing that something was going on in the case, Chris soon changed his mind and decided to reach out to the Wisconsin Innocence Project in 1999. He told them that he'd been coerced into a confession and that he and Richard were innocent. As a result, the organization requested more advanced DNA testing on the samples collected at the crime scene. And in November 2000, the results came back. The DNA belonged to Joseph Marino, not Chris or Richard. As it turns out, the DNA testing in 1990 only analyzed a single gene, whereas the new test examined 10. Additionally, a ballistics test confirmed that the gun found in Joseph's home had been the one used to kill Nancy. So, on January 16, 2001, after nearly 13 years behind bars, Chris Ochoa was released from prison at age 34. He was fully acquitted of the crime a few months later. Richard Danziger was also released a few months later, but the brain damage he sustained during his prison sentence left him needing lifelong care. Joseph further admitted to investigators that his motive for killing Nancy stemmed from his hatred for a female correctional officer he encountered while serving time in prison for robberies and other crimes. He decided that he would murder a woman who resembled her when he got out, and that's why he chose Nancy. Finally, he claimed that she had led him into the restaurant that morning because he was wearing a workman's uniform and claimed to be fixing a broken soda machine. Joseph was ultimately convicted of capital murder and given a life sentence for Nancy's murder. But that still begs the question, why would Chris confess to a crime he didn't commit? Well, as it turns out, Chris, Richard, and Richard's girlfriend Donna had been interviewed by Detective Hector Polanco, a man known for cracking even the most challenging cases. Chris adamantly denied having any knowledge regarding Nancy's murder, but the interview pressed on regardless. Meanwhile, in a separate interview room, Donna explained that she and Richard had been together at her home that entire night. Richard also denied having any involvement in the crime, but detectives felt he knew details about the crime that were not public knowledge, although those admissions have never been fully disclosed. Although Richard never falsely confessed, it's interesting that in 52% of false confession cases that were later exonerated through DNA evidence, the exoneree included facts that weren't public in their confessions. This suggests that giving details about a crime that are not public knowledge may not be quite as indicative of guilt as police may think. As the relentless questioning continued, investigators told Chris that Richard would turn against him and that he needed to protect himself. This technique is called the prisoner's dilemma, where the suspect is set up in such a way that both parties choose to protect themselves at the expense of the other. As a result, both participants find themselves in a worse state than if they cooperated with each other. Some speculate that the detectives working this case used questionable techniques to garner information from him, such as throwing furniture and showing him graphic autopsy photos. 2 days after the questioning began, Chris buckled under the pressure and signed a written confession, that listed Richard as his accomplice. At the time, he believed this was the only way to avoid death by lethal injection. The confession stated that he and Richard had entered the Pizza Hut using stolen keys, and that together they had assaulted and killed Nancy. It also included fabricated details of the crime that would haunt the victim's family for over a decade. Moreover, Chris's inexperienced defense attorneys didn't believe in his innocence and were solely focused on avoiding the death penalty. So they urged him to testify against Richard and basically just throw him under the bus. It's possible that the reason Chris changed his story about who shot Nancy during Richard's trial is because he felt guilty for blaming his friend. He may have felt that since he was now safe from the death penalty, he could try to undo the damage that was done toward Richard. Chris only stuck with his story when the police visited in 1998 because he knew that it would be nearly impossible to secure parole if he started denying his guilt. Chris and Richard ultimately received millions of dollars each in settlements. However, Richard also sued Chris for false incrimination, which he willingly settled over a hefty sum. Of his confession, Chris stated, "I know people think no reasonable person would confess to something they didn't do. Who the hell is reasonable in that situation? You're not normal. You're there, never been in trouble before. You've been taught to respect officers with guns. They put you in a room. They've got the badges. What are you going to do?" According to the Innocence Project, there have been 375 DNA exonerations in the United States. Of these, 29% involved false confessions. In 49% of those false confession cases, the false confessor was 21 years old or younger at the time of arrest. It seems surprising that someone would confess to a
That's
murder
crazy.
they didn't commit, but in fact,
Well,
in 130 of
they're
these
young
DNA
and they don't
exoneration
understand.
cases, the
That's
exoneree was
why.
wrongfully convicted of murder, with most of these, 62%, involving
And
false confessions.
you
People may
can't.
falsely
You
confess
don't
to a
know what you're
crime as
gonna
a way to
do
get out of a stressful situation,
in a
such as the
situation like that.
interrogation, or to avoid punishment, which in this case would be the lethal
How many
injection that
times
Chris was
have you
threatened
been in
with.
an argument and
A
you're just like,
suspect may
fine,
also
you're right,
confess in order to
fuck it,
access a
leave it
reward,
alone.
such as being able to go home
It's
or
the
speak
same
with family.
concept,
In interrogations,
but
police
it's a little
sometimes
bit
use
more in
high-end
depth than
inducements,
that.
which means that
But
suspects are led to believe that they will receive a lower punishment if they confess, but a higher punishment if they do not confess. Chris may have felt like there was no way out with some kind of punitive outcome, so he chose to confess in order to get the lesser punishment. All right, on that note, let's move on to our last true crime story. When paramedics responded to the call of two dead bodies at the Durham family home in Sand Lake, Michigan, they had no idea that they were in for the shock of a lifetime. While moving the bodies, one of their supposed murder victims suddenly came to life, unleashing a web of lies and betrayal. Still, just when investigators thought they'd hit a dead end in the case, a most unlikely witness came forward with a chilling account that didn't fly well with anyone. 46-year-old Martin and 49-year-old Glenna Durham were a married couple of 11 years who shared 5 children from previous relationships. In 1995, Martin was involved in a devastating car accident that horribly damaged the left side of his body and brain. His injuries rendered him disabled and resulted in significant memory loss, thus leaving him unable to work. So the family was forced to rely on Martin's disability checks and whatever the government paid Glenna to care for her husband. Still, their real money troubles came from Glenna's gambling addiction, and she would frequently visit casinos. Martin was much more frugal with his spending, so naturally this habit didn't sit well with him, and the couple often argued about their financial problems. As Martin's physical health continued to deteriorate, Glenna took complete control over their bill payments, but by this point her gambling addiction had spiraled out of control. However, when a man showed up to repossess one of their vehicles in 2010, Glenna somehow convinced Martin that it was all some big mistake. 5 years later, the local newspaper published a notice about their home going into foreclosure, and Glenna offered her husband the same weak excuse. It seemed like everything was starting to fall apart. Then, in May of that same year, one of the Durham's neighbors noticed that it had been 2 days since they last saw Martin or Glenna. The worried neighbor went over to investigate but was greeted only by silence, so they ventured further into the house. Upon entering the living room, a gruesome discovery was made. The bodies of Martin and Glenna were sprawled out on the floor. Martin was dressed in only his underwear, and Glenna was fully clothed with a blanket covering her lower half. There was blood all over the place, and the neighbors struggled to locate a pulse on either body, so they immediately called 911. Paramedics arrived on the scene and found Martin deceased from 5 gunshot wounds. Glenna also appeared to be dead from injuries to her head, but when emergency workers went to move her body, they were stunned to realize she was still alive. Glenna's breathing was shallow and her body jolted once before being rushed to the hospital. In the ambulance, she was incredibly confused and combative to the point where she needed to be restrained. Medics said she asked several times, "Why are you doing this, Marty?" Doctors determined that Glenna had suffered 2 minor bullet wounds at the hospital, but they said she would survive. However, once recovered, Glenna claimed to have no recollection of the events that led to her being shot. An autopsy confirmed that Martin had died from 3 close-range gunshot wounds to his chest, with 2 additional rounds fired into his back and lower arm from farther away. It's possible for memory loss to occur following significant trauma, which could be one explanation as to why Glenna allegedly couldn't remember anything about being shot. Meanwhile, back at the Durham home, investigators tried to make sense of the bizarre crime scene. Based on the circumstances, they assumed a third individual was involved, but found no evidence suggesting a break-in. Those close to Martin expressed to officers that he had been very wary of intruders and kept his doors locked and deadbolted at all times. Nevertheless, detectives did locate a Ruger .6 pistol under a chair in the living room, along with various ammunition scattered throughout the house. The next day, some of the couple's children returned to the home to clean and uncovered a manila envelope in the living room filled with letters written by Glenna. Specifically, the letters seemed to imply that she was planning to take her own life and included apologies to her loved ones. She even wrote one to her ex-husband, asking him to watch after their children when she's gone. Investigators questioned Glenna about the letters, but she claimed to have no memory of writing them. Moreover, she told detectives that she had no reason to kill herself or Martin, saying, "I wouldn't shoot my husband. I'd be better off divorcing him and leaving him." Her explanation seemed fishy to investigators, but they didn't have the evidence needed to file any charges, so they tried to glean as much information as possible from those close to the Durham family. One relative commented to detectives. She indicated he was a pain in the ass to take care of, and one of these days she was going to kill him. Authorities also requested access to Glenna's cell phone records, which showed that she had used her internet browser the day before the shooting to look up Ruger pistols. The web pages visited included Ruger Inside Out, Ruger Safety Blue Book, and Ruger New Model .6 single-action revolvers. But of course, Glenna denied ever visiting those sites from her phone, alleging that she only used her phone to play games. Then someone else started talking, and I'll give you a hint. It wasn't Glenna. Instead, a video released by Martin's ex-wife showed his beloved pet African gray parrot, the only witness to the shooting, reenacting what appeared to be their final fight. In the
What?
video, which quickly went viral, the parrot moves from side to side while changing its voice to reflect 2 people bickering, possibly Martin and Glenna.
Get your on it now! Don't shut up and you! No!
Finally, the bird exclaims, "Don't shoot," which some family members strongly believe was the last thing Martin ever said. Martin's ex-wife stated, "To listen to the
What?
whole 2-minute rant and to know Marty and to know Glenna and to know the things that they would say to each other, it's haunting. My house turns cold. I get chills when I hear it." The shocking video
bird?
ultimately put even more pressure on the police to make an arrest, but they still wanted to ensure the case against Glenna would hold up at trial. So the lead prosecutor communicated with experts worldwide about using the parrot's statements as evidence, but couldn't justify the admission. This evidence is extremely interesting from a legal and evidentiary perspective. It is obviously highly unusual to have an animal as a witness that makes a statement. All out-of-court statements, whether by a person or, in this case, an animal, is considered hearsay. Hearsay evidence is usually inadmissible at trial. The reason hearsay is barred as evidence is because one cannot cross-examine the person who is making the statement, since that person is not in court. This case is
Can't
extremely unique in
cross-examine
that the parrot could
the
technically be
bird.
presented in court, but there's no way to cross-examine a parrot, and its statements cannot be deemed reliable. Just when it appeared the trail was running cold, police received results from the ballistics tests run on the pistol found under the chair, which confirmed it to be the murder weapon. Moreover, handwriting tests concluded that Glenna had been the one to write the letters found in the home. Roughly 1 year after his death, investigators finally had enough evidence to arrest Glenna and charge her with Martin's murder. In July 2017, Glenna Durham stood trial for her crimes, with the prosecution arguing that she had intended to take her own life along with Martin's, but backed out on the plan. They also emphasized Glenna's extensive gambling habits and the couple's crippling financial issues as a motive. The theory that Glenna was planning on taking her own life as well makes sense, given the apology letter she left behind. If she'd been planning to kill only Martin and pretend that they'd both been shot by a third person, it seems unlikely that she would have left such incriminating letters in the home. In addition, it's possible that Glenna may have been experiencing caregiver fatigue or burnout, which is a state of physical, emotional, and mental exhaustion as a result of caring for her husband after his car accident. In fact, one symptom of caregiver burnout is feelings of wanting to hurt yourself or the person for whom you are caring. There was clearly no squawking in the jury because after just 1 day of deliberating, Glenna was convicted of first-degree murder and a felony firearm charge. She was sentenced to life in prison without a chance for parole and is currently
She was
carrying out her
not
term at a
happy.
women's correctional facility in Michigan.
She was not happy. Wow, a bird. The bird reenacted it, though. That's crazy. I've never. That's wild. That's definitely a form of hearsay. You can't cross examine the bird. Mr. Bird, lady, sir, ma'am. Is that what you heard? That's crazy. That's wild. Well, that is all for today, folks. That was a kicker there at the end. I did not expect a bird. Wow. And the false confession thing, like I really kind of was real skeptical about those things at first too. But then as you get to looking at them and you get to thinking about it, especially for young people and young people that don't know the law and you're brought up, or maybe not nowadays. Nowadays, kids are brought up to, um, with all the social media and stuff, they're brought up to, maybe distrust the law more. But, you're brought up to trust law enforcement and what have you. But, um, when they tell you, we can do these things and this thing, and if you say this, this can happen, and if you do this, this can happen, and you have to tell us this, or this is going to happen, and they can keep you there forever, and then they leave you in this room forever, and they cannot feed you, they can keep you from going to the bathroom, you know they can keep food and drinks, and they cannot give you stuff. And finally you're just like, fine, what, man? Like, what do you want me to say? Like, have you ever been in an argument with somebody for so long or for so many days, and you're just like, fine, fuck it, whatever. Like, I don't even want to be right anymore. Like, but you're right. And they're just being an asshole and they just won't let you be right. And you're like, fine, fuck it. Whatever. Do you, boo. Because I don't want to fight with you no more. I mean, shit, I do that with my kids all the time. They're like little fucking interrogators all the time. Like, don't fucking argue with me. You know I'm gonna give up. I don't want to argue. So I could see people say all the time, like, why would you falsely confess? But I could see it happening. I could see how people could do it. Especially young people who don't know any better, especially when they say, if you just let us know, like if you just let us know, we can help you. And when they say that, they're like, okay, well, if you can help me, I can leave today, knowing that if I confess to this awful, crazy crime, I'm not gonna fucking leave here today. But I don't know. And that first one, man, that's crazy. It sounds like a Jason Momoa movie. Like they were up in the mountains and the people came for the drugs. This family didn't actually have no drugs. They just came and wanted to rob them and kill the family. What was that movie? Brave? I don't know. It had Jason Momoa in it. I don't remember what the name of it was, but he was pretty. So yeah. Could you imagine like Christmas coming back from shopping and walking into your house and that happens? Mm. I don't know. Anyway, okay. Well, that is all for that. That's all for this one, folks. That's all for today. That's all I got for you. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Leave a comment in the comment section below. Share with your friends. Let them know what you think. Let me know what you think in the comments below. And I shall see you in the next one. Deuces.